Hi, my name is Zoe G. I'm an Environmental Studies and International Affairs major at Northeastern University and also a volunteer for Future Frogmen. These past 6 months, I've been on co-op in Sydney, Australia, working for an organization called OzMap, whose aim is to quantify microplastic data across Australia. I've been working on analyzing data, organizing training events, and analyzing microplastics. Joining me today is Dr. Scott Wilson, who is an ecotoxicologist, lecturer at Macquarie University, and also the research director of OzMap. Before we start, would you like to explain a little more about your background and how you became interested in this field?
Yeah, hi Zoe, and thanks for the opportunities to speak today. I've looked up the Frogmen group, and you guys are doing some really nice work, so it's a pleasure to be here. So for me, I've been in the academia field for 20 plus years. It's gone quite quick, actually. I've very much enjoyed my life in academia, and it's really been driven from my interest in trying to understand the environment and potentially the harm we are causing it and living in it, and the ways we unfortunately pollute it. So my background, as you mentioned, is in ecotoxicology. So I've kind of studied the effects of chemicals and pollutants to a range of aquatic systems, both marine and freshwater, over the years, looking at, as I said, trying to understand, how we can better manage the environment and reduce these impacts. So my role, or how I got into that, actually was during my undergraduate days. I was very much inspired by a professor who taught me, the value of marine biology and adding that to a management framework. So not just pure science, but it's applied science. And from that, I was kind of lucky enough to get some scholarships looking at different types of pollutants and their impacts in the environment. So I've kind of worked on, as I said, a range of pollutants over the years, things from acid mine runoff to heavy metal pollution to pesticide impacts from agricultural areas. So it's really been a range of things, and unfortunately, because we're putting so many chemicals out there in the environment, we're really just scraping the surface in terms of what we know about the potential harm that these chemicals have. We're producing something like 10,000 chemicals every week, new chemicals, and so we just don't really have a good understanding not only of the individual chemicals and their impacts, but once in the environment where there's a mixture of chemicals, what they play together in a mixture sense. And so trying to unravel that as a scientist is kind of been one of my goals. And so it's been very rewarding in some regards, because I've been able to make some positive changes, I feel, over those years. So it's really, for me, what drives me is trying to improve our environment and our practices of living in this wonderful planet we're on. So that's kind of been the driver for a lot of this work, and I've been really fortunate enough to be conduct research around the world with a lot of different areas, even in the States. So I've been to the wonderful Duluth labs in Minnesota, where the EPA labs are based, the mid-continental labs there, and done some work there with colleagues from those labs. So stateside, I haven't done a lot, but in terms of other parts of the world in Europe and Asia, I've done quite a bit. So I really am interested in not only obviously understanding the problem, but communicating that problem to people like yourselves and groups like the Frogmen, and but also to the community as a whole. I think as a scientist, my role is to communicate what we're finding, what we know, in the broader sense. So yes, we publish our results in journals, etc., but also trying to communicate that more broadly, I think, is an important aspect of what I do.
Very nice. Well, you've done quite a bit of research in your career, but are there certain projects that you find most interesting or notable that you want to mention here?
Yeah, there's been a range of projects that I've kind of hinted on. Probably the most rewarding have been the ones where I've seen quite dramatic changes or outcomes based on the findings of the research. So I worked on a project 10 years ago or more, where we were looking at an anti-fouling paint, a chemical that was put onto ships to stop barnacles and algae growing on it. But what we found is that chemical, because it leaches out into the environment, was causing a whole range of harm to different marine life. And so we were able to get some legislation. We were able to prove that harm, and then able to get some policy and legislation in place here in Australia that enabled that chemical to be banned. And now, because people were doing similar work elsewhere around the world, it's now a global ban. So I like to think that I was a small part of that change, that global change in getting this chemical, which was quite harmful. It was actually at very low concentrations, causing reproductive changes in a whole range of marine organisms. So we're talking about one part per trillion, which is, so 1 part of this chemical in 1 trillion parts of water was still causing impacts. So very, very minute amounts were needed to cause effects. So it was quite a nasty chemical. So things like that have been very rewarding for me over the years, and most noteworthy. But then, as I also mentioned, it's seeing community change as well. And so, more recently, I've been working in the plastic space and seeing how the change or the groundswell of the community in the last 2-3 years, and their growing awareness and interest in plastic and the plastic issue has also been quite fulfilling for me, because I've locally here been able to drive some of that interest and change, hopefully.
Very nice. So currently you're looking at plastics. How much do we know about toxicity or effects of plastic in the marine environment? Like, what have you been finding throughout your research?
Yeah, so over the last 5+ years, probably close to 10 years now, I've been looking at the plastic problem. And as you're aware, and many people listening will be aware, plastic is a growing problem. And so what we've found is that not only is it being ingested by a whole range of species, from everything from plankton through to whales, pretty much every species we see in the aquatic system now has plastic in them in some way, shape or form. So it's quite scary to think that there's so much plastic out there that it's all pervasive through everything, and it's not just in the marine environments. We're finding in freshwater environments and also terrestrial systems as well. So because it's been a cheap, readily made and readily disposable commodity, it's just gotten everywhere. So that ingestion is one thing, but what we're doing here in the labs, and you've seen a little bit of it during your time here, is looking at the impacts of that plastic. And so plastic generally is benign, but it can cause blockages, obviously, if enough of it's ingested, and it can cause, and we've seen lots of examples of this in seabirds, where there's starvation, malnutrition caused because the birds are being fed just plastics and not much else, and so they starving to death because of that. So you get those effects, but one of the aspects I'm also looking at is the actual toxicity of these plastics to marine life and to organisms generally, including us. So what we don't know, or what we know very a little about, is the effects that the potential chemicals on and in these plastics are having. So when plastics are first made as a product, they add plasticizers, they add colorants, they add dyes, stains, a whole range of things, added various additives to them to allow that product to be made. And so those chemicals can leach off into the environment, and if an animal ingests that, it can leach off into that animal as well. So we are looking at the potential of those chemicals leaching off the plastics and what potential harm they're having. And then we're also looking, the other beautiful thing about plastics is when they're in the environment, they actually act like sponges, and so they're absorbing a lot of other chemicals out of the water as well. So they're good at sucking up a whole range of nasty things, from metals to pesticides to persistent organic pollutants, onto their surface. So that's the good thing, because they're taking it out of the water and not making it available to a range of other organisms. But if an animal ingests that bit of plastic that has all these chemicals on it, then it's getting a real cocktail of potential harm there. So what we're trying to understand is what potential those chemicals have of causing toxicity once they're ingested. So we're really at the start of that, and there's been a few studies around the world on that, but it's there's still lots more to do in trying to understand how plastics are actually causing a toxic effect.
So you mentioned the toxicity of plastics and the dangers that they pose, but I know you're working specifically on microplastics through OzMap. Could you explain how OzMap works to help solve this issue or help bring awareness to this?
Yeah, sure. So OzMap is the Australian Microplastic Assessment Project. So it's a nationwide program here in Australia where we're looking for community. So it's a citizen science project. So we're looking for the community, school groups, etc., to help us gather data on microplastic loads around the Australian shorelines, both freshwater and marine. Because we just don't have a lot of information on how much is out there. And so the best way to manage a problem is to understand, where are your hotspots, which areas you should be targeting, so you can obviously better manage those particular areas and reduce the risk or harm to wildlife. So OzMap has been only going for a year, but we're gathering data using the community so we train people up, and they collect the information and send it back to us, and we do some further analysis on it. And obviously this is some of the things you've been involved with, Zoe. So in terms of identifying the types of microplastics, the colors, the sizes, but we also look at the contaminants on the plastics as well. So it's quite a broad scale program and unique actually on a global scale. It's one of the first programs of its kind to be collecting this type of information as a community or citizen science program. So it's, as I said, it's leading the way in some regards, even though it's geographically localized. The style of the program is getting a lot of interest outside of Australia as well. So OzMap is contributing to us as scientists, helping us, gather the information, and we are working. OzMap has a group of partners. There's kind of 8 core partners which come from different spheres. So there's research partners, there's education partners. So OzMap is also about raising awareness of the issues of plastics and microplastics. So we have education partners. We've got not-for-profits and community group partners. And then we've also got government agencies. So we are working closely with them in trying to resolve the problem. And so we've had some success, or we're working on the way to success of trying to reduce some of these plastics from entering into the environment. And so working with local and state government agencies, where we say, well, there's a hot spot here, we've identified these types of plastics, and we can almost work back up the catchment. And so I've had some students do some kind of supplementary projects looking at identifying sources of these plastics within a catchment, and tracking it back to source is really part of the aim of OzMap as well. And so that then allows the managers in the government agencies to implement some strategies to reduce those inputs getting into the environment. So OzMap has definitely been beneficial in their overall program, and so we're continuing to expand the program, and so we've had some interest from outside the region, from in kind of the Pacific Isles, and also Asia, and parts of Africa as well. So going forward, we see OzMap not just as an Australian thing, but potentially a global thing. But slowly.
Slowly. It's only the first year.
Thank you for watching the Future Frogmen Conversation Series. Please check out our website at www.futurefrogmen.org.